So for all but one of the first 7 or 8 games of the year, Miami's going to be a substantial favorite. Of course, so we're talking about the Florida State game in game number 3. So again, the ranking is going to be determined by week to week by the wins and losses. But you got to think that a game at Tallahassee against what could be the number 1 team in the country at that point, if they knock off Alabama, and certainly unless they get blown out against the Crimson Tide, going to be a top 5 team, that Miami's going to, even if they play within a touchdown of Florida State, as they have the last couple of years, they maintain a top 15 to 20 ranking. A blowout's going to send them off the top 25 radar, and a win, of course, is going to catapult them into a national championship race at that point. So let's segue to the season. The 2017 campaign's underway here in about 3 weeks. An interesting date, Cam, to get us started here after the Bethune-Cookman opener is going to Arkansas State. So I don't know if you know the details behind the agreement that was made there and why the choice was made for a top program to make the trip to Arkansas State.
Yeah, this is the return game from the back end of a home and home, if you will. So Arkansas State came to Miami in 2014. That was Brad Kaya's freshman year. If you look it up on Giphy or on Twitter or anything, this is the time that they did the fainting goat for a fake punt. If you remember, they had a guy in the slot who was actually on the line, so he couldn't go down the field. So he just literally crossed his arms over his chest and fell back. It was hilarious. And then the up back who threw that pass through interception. So, you know, it didn't really work. But, yeah, this is the back end of a home and home, and we did not buy our way out of it, or Miami did not buy their way out of it, and are going to Jonesboro, Arkansas for week 2. And it's, you know, it's just like last year when Miami went to Appalachian State in Boone, North Carolina, you know, rolled in as the biggest, baddest team that's ever come in there, blew them out and got our win and then moved on. And basically, that's what we're going to do to Arkansas State. It's, you know, it's just a game that's on the schedule. We're not afraid to play anybody anywhere, unlike some other teams like, you know, the University of Florida, who's playing their first out-of-state, out-of-conference game out of state in like 30-something years. I think they've only done it one other time in my lifetime. The Miami Hurricanes, we're not scared to go anywhere. You know, we went to we've gone to Louisville when they were not a conference game. We went to K-State. We've gone other places. So, look, it's the back end of a home and home. It was a fine agreement there. Arkansas State is probably going to be their division or their conference's champion. So this is not necessarily even a pushover game. This is a good non-conference team that we can go up against there, which is going to be a little challenging because it's going to be, you know, second game of the year, first game on the road, where you're going to have all those kind of things. They're going to be rabid fans. It's going to be loud out there. They're going to be hyped for this game because, again, Miami's coming to town. This is the show. This is like, you know, you've seen these old school movies when the circus comes to town and everybody from all around stops what they're doing and they converge on this little city because this gigantic show is now here. This is what Miami is when compared to Arkansas State. So I'm not worried or concerned. Obviously, respect all opponents and fear none. But you know, it's just happens to be the back end of a home and home. We're going to go up there, we're going to whoop their ass, and we're going to move on.
Those Arkansas State and Toledo games are good ones to have because many college football fans focus on the big teams and the big games and the marquee programs, and we know that that's where the dollars and the eyeballs are. As you mentioned right there, Arkansas State, they have played extremely well. It slips my mind exactly what they did last year, but prior to that, they had 5 consecutive Sun Belt championships there. The Toledo game, the Rockets have been extremely competitive in the MAC and a very formidable football team that went to Arkansas in 2015 and pulled off an upset against a pretty formidable SEC team that went on to win a bowl game. So those are not give-me type games. Yes, Miami's much more talented, much more dynamic, and as you point out, I would expect a 3-touchdown win, but they're not just going to roll over these teams, and they're good opponents to take on early in the season.
Yeah, and I just looked it up real quick. Arkansas State went 8-5 last year and beat Central Florida 31-13 in their bowl game. So, you know, it's yeah, they have a nice coach, Blake Anderson, who's been rumored for a couple bigger jobs and things like that. So, yeah, you know, having those kind of games is a good test for this team. Obviously, I think that we're going to win them. Arkansas State and Toledo as well. And, when you have a Notre Dame on Veterans Day, November the 11th, that's a big game in the non-conference. And then you add that obviously with the Bethune-Cookman bye game blowout to start the season. Those are, you got two solid group of 5 teams in Toledo and Arkansas State who could realistically both be their conference's champions. You have Notre Dame, who is not going to be as bad as last year, even though that bad Notre Dame team beat us last year, which I still cannot get over because it was a terrible, terrible team and such a wasted weekend that I took. But, I went up to Notre Dame with my friends, so I got to have that experience and things like that. I've told a couple of those stories on the Twitter timeline if you follow me there. But, yeah, I think that, the non-conference schedule is not overwhelming, but it's definitely manageable. So you're definitely looking at 4-0 or 3-1 at the worst in the non-conference. You start with Florida State in conference on the 3rd week, September 16th. That obviously is the biggest game on our schedule every year. It just happens to be that. Regardless of what they do in the first week, it's funny because a lot of Florida State fans on social media are talking about the Florida State-Miami game and not, Florida State-Alabama, and I wonder why that is. But, hey, regardless of what happens, they're going to bring their best effort. And that was exactly what we saw last year. They had a couple losses already on their schedule, on their record last year, and then they came down here. And to steal the SEC's motto, Miami, Florida State just means more. These guys know each other for years. They played with and against each other in high school. You got bragging rights in the families, friends, neighborhoods. There's plenty of guys from around. We have Bradley Jennings Jr., whose father is from Carroll City, which is the Miami area, but he went to Florida State. The father did and played there. So the father went to Florida State and the son now goes to Miami. So you're talking like in the same household. You got all kinds of rivalry there. And regardless of what happens before that game for either team, that's going to be the game where both teams try the hardest. They bring their best. You just got extra. And if you can't see that as a fan or somebody watching this game, I don't know what to tell you because it's easy to see. And when, watching either team, because I usually do try to watch Florida State or part of their games in the weeks leading up to when we play them. And you could easily see on the field, it's demonstrably different for both sides, Miami and Florida State, that game. So, that's a game that we're obviously going to go all out in. It's been 7 years since we beat them. The last time was in 2009 at Florida State with a young quarterback named Ja'Cory Harris. So, maybe there can be a similarity with a young quarterback this year. And I'm just going to say young as in has not played a lot. I'm not going to put anybody's name by that, even if you've been watching these videos and you know who I hope the starting quarterback is going to be. So that's just going to be a huge game. Outside of that, and you were mentioning the lines and the favoring and things like that. Miami's going to be favored in 11 of 12 games this year. And it might be close in some of those other ones, but every game except for Florida State, as it stands right now on the ESPN FPI, there was another one from Bovada had some lines that came out. And then I want to say Bill Connolly's S&P Plus from Football Outsiders. All of those have Miami favored in 11 to 12 games. So that means that we have the ability, if Miami does what they need to do, to have a very successful season. I've already predicted 10-2 in the regular season. You can pick whichever 2 wins or losses you think that is. I'm not going to fight you on whichever ones you think that might be. If you want to say, hey, we're going to lose at Arkansas State, Toledo, and win the rest of them, hey, cool, do you. I'm just saying that there's going to be 10 up and 2 down. That's what I predict from right now. And I stand by that. I think that this is a very manageable schedule. We're going to have more talent on the field against every single team than Florida State, and the gap between Miami's roster of talent and Florida State's is not as big a gulf as it once was. And I think that the adrenaline of that game can overcome some of that. Also, plus the fact our defensive line is our strength, and their offensive line is one of their weaknesses. So that's a great matchup right there. And I know that I've probably stolen the thunder of somebody who's going to write the matchup of the week later on in this season as we lead up to the Florida State game from our website. But there's things that you can like about every single game. And like I said, we're already favored. Miami is in 11 of 12. So the schedule is really not as difficult as it was last year when you had that murderer's row 5 games in October when we went Miami went 1-4. Miami has 5 games in September. Bethune, win. Arkansas State, win. Florida State, toss-up. Toledo, win. And Duke on a Friday, which should be a win because Duke is not good. Other than that, after the bye week in early October, Georgia Tech on a Thursday, that should be a win. Syracuse the next Saturday, that should be a win. At North Carolina, rebuilding and completely retooling, that should be a win. Virginia Tech at home, that should be a win. Notre Dame has talent, so I'll call that a toss-up. Virginia, that should be a win on November 18th. And then at Pittsburgh, that should be a win. So, I mean, it's not a real murderer's row kind of schedule. And as long as Miami finds their groove, gets some solid quarterback play, and the athletes play to the level that they have, and not resting on laurels either, because everybody's talking about the defense being great. And Manny Diaz, the defensive coordinator, the other day said, hey, wait, we did really well last year. I'm not going to say we weren't good then. We haven't done anything this year. We haven't tackled anybody. We're losing guys, Rayshawn Jenkins, Jamal Carter, Corn Elder from that secondary who made all kinds of tackles. If we missed 2 of those tackles those guys made every game last year, you're talking way more losses. So, I mean, we need these guys to do their job. Everybody has to do their job and has to have that chip on their shoulder of not being comfortable with 5 wins and a bowl game win to end last season, but take that and really refocus us to that level of focus that Brad Kaya spoke about after the Russell Athletic Bowl, when he said, we took this game like it was our national championship. We put in every ounce of preparation and focus and dedication, and you saw that on the field. That's what I want to see from this team, and we have the schedule to be able to do it. And if they do that, then we're going to really be successful. So that's what I'm really looking for Miami this year.
Shameless plug on my scheduling series. So I have looked at every Power 5 schedule. So that's all the Power 5 conferences plus the major independents, one of which Miami plays in Notre Dame. So this is what stands out to me about the Miami schedule, which I rank as the 11th most difficult in the ACC. So if you do the math, that would be the 3rd, 4th easiest in the ACC. So we know they play in the Coastal. We know what the Coastal is. Miami is the best talent. They've not proven to be the best team yet. And we know that there's a collection of teams that are very similar in terms of talent and most likely ability this year and performance. Pitt, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, etc. They're good teams. They're decent teams. They will be a challenge, but they're not great teams. So who do you play in the other division is always my question, especially in the SEC and the ACC, because you only play 2 of the other 7. So there are large discrepancies in schedule difficulty. And as you well know, Cam, you get from a rivalry standpoint and from a viewership standpoint, this is a great thing. But from the standpoint of having to play a difficult schedule, it's tough on Miami because they always play Florida State. So that's the crossover rivalry. Nobody else gets that. Georgia Tech gets Clemson every year. So who's the other game? A couple years ago, of course, before Al Golden was shown the door, it was Florida State and Clemson, both of them. And that makes it really tough. Louisville a couple years ago. So this year it's Syracuse is the other one. So it's lighter than it could be with a Clemson, North Carolina State, or Louisville. And then you mentioned the out-of-conference games, and Notre Dame kind of highlights that. But the game at home this year, and what I've been really impressed with Power 5 scheduling this year that I have yet to see maybe in my lifetime is that teams are bulking up. So if you looked at Power 5 schedules out of conference just a couple years ago, most schools were scheduling 1 difficult game against a Power 5, and the other 3 were cream puffs or an FCS in there. You saw a handful of schools, Baylor being the most prominent. I would get on them every year for not scheduling anybody. Now you're seeing 3/4 of those 68 teams in Power 5 play scheduling 2. So Miami doesn't have that this year. They just have the Notre Dame game, although Arkansas State and Toledo are formidable, and one of those games is on the road. So it's a decent schedule. The ACC might be the toughest conference in college football, but Miami plays in the lesser of the 2 divisions.
Yeah, and I agree with all that, analysis you just said, but I think that there will be years where we have 2 Power 5 non-conference games in the future. Miami does in the future, but for the 2017 season, it would not surprise me again if Arkansas State and Toledo both won their conferences championships. So it's definitely not as bad as a Baylor who plays nobody and then complained about not getting into the playoff a couple years ago. They played you and me and 9 other dudes, just grabbing a helmet and a shoulder pad set for the first time in forever. Like that, they didn't test themselves. So, you know, there are some interesting scheme dynamics that are going on because obviously Arkansas State plays up-tempo spread, so you're going to see that a little bit later in the year. If you have that air raid spread from Toledo, because they throw the ball all over the place. Their quarterback had like 4,800 yards or 4,300 yards passing last year. That'll prepare us for a Syracuse game. So I think that there's a scheme fit there where you're looking at one thing at a group of 5 level, and because Toledo could beat Syracuse, or that would be a close game. So I'm not saying it's a really low level to high level, but you're looking at a couple of things to prepare you for what you're going to see from a conference game later. So, yeah, and, you know, the other thing with the schedule is we have the marquee non-conference game this year with Notre Dame. But going into the future, Miami has some of those elite games in the national college football landscape as non-conference games. 2018 season kickoff in Jerry World in Arlington, Texas against LSU. 2019 season kickoff in Orlando against Florida because they finally stopped being punks and running away from us because they have only beat us one time in 34 years. After that, you got Michigan State home and home in 2020 and 21. After that, you got Texas A&M 22 and 23. And then you're back on the Notre Dame cycle 24 and 25. So the better part of a decade, you have one elite game a year against a non-conference powerhouse program. And I mean, yeah, Michigan State was down last year, but we scheduled that game 2 years ago when they were going to the Big Ten championship game. You know, Texas A&M, they've been kind of middling, but that's still a powerhouse team, and that's the team that Miami's played previously in college football history as well. So if you're looking, I mean, yeah, okay, you got the one game, and people will say, oh, we've seen Notre Dame before. We played them, you know, 3 times in the last 8 years. That's too much. Again, I just gave you from 2018 to 2025 who Miami has as their lead non-conference game. All you need is now another Power 5 or, you know, FBS level team, which, again, Toledo is a good team who can win their conference. Arkansas State is another good team who could win their conference for the 4th time in 5 years, I want to say. You know, Miami's doing well with the schedule, so it's not the toughest as it could be this year, obviously, because we get Syracuse as opposed to NC State, who we blew out last year, and Clemson, who blew us out 2 years ago, as the other crossover from the Atlantic Division. But, you know, I get frustrated when people say that Miami is playing only the Sisters of the Poor as though we have a Baylor kind of schedule when that just is not the truth. And when Miami starts winning, which should happen this year because we have better talent than these other teams in the Coastal Division, then who cares? Because these are the teams in your conference, which is the best, if not the second best conference in all of college football. And when you're winning games, everybody's happy. It's like when you're putting up jump shots. Your arm's not tired if the ball's going in. So I'm ready for that ball to go through that hoop, you know, so we can get out here and win some games and have a good schedule.
Well, Cam, I'll clarify, and I think you understand that I follow the sport pretty heavily, so I'm making an overgeneralization when I say, okay, Power 5 game is difficult, a non-Power 5 game is automatically difficult. The 2 programs that you're facing this year, as you mentioned, Toledo and Arkansas State, we could go to every conference in the Power 5 and we could select 2 to 3 teams that there's almost no question that Arkansas State and Toledo specifically are better than. So that's an overgeneralization that I'm making. Okay, Miami's only playing 1 Power 5. Other schools are playing 2 Power 5s because you're playing 2 other teams on your schedule that would beat 2 to 3 teams in all the Power 5 conferences each. So they're pretty good football teams.
Right, and I mean, we can do the 2 Power 5 thing. Cool. Can I get Rutgers on the phone? How UConn? How are you doing? Illinois, like Purdue right now, who's still rebuilding. Like we can do. Well, no, Vanderbilt actually beat some. No, but still, we'll blow Vanderbilt out. I mean, we can go and do that. But I mean, I know it's an overgeneralization, but I was just responding to some things that I've seen and heard from the Miami Hurricanes fan base, which is why I kind of went on that tangent.
All right, Cam Underwood, State of the U. We track him down from Miami Conversation as much as possible. Please join him there. And, of course, you can follow us at YouTube for our videos and on Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher for the audio. Cam, it's always a great discussion. We appreciate the time, man.
No problem. Always good to be with you guys. So be sure you check us out on stateoftheu.com. See you next time.